Hi, I'm Christopher McClinton, CMO for Finxact. Welcome to this edition of Extensible Podcast. I think you'll be glad you tuned into this edition. Today we have a special guest. Sunil Sachdev is head of enterprise-wide embedded finance for Fiserv, and today we'll be hearing from Sunil about how Fiserv plans to address that market and how they plan to deploy Finxact into that arena. We'll also be hearing about another exciting development, which is the Fiserv Developer Studio, and how fintechs and developers will be able to interact with Finxact and other Fiserv assets there in a way that's very thoughtful in terms of the progression, very much structured to be self-paced and self-service. Sunil, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Super excited, man.
Well, let's start a little bit with, if you don't mind, you have held a number of leadership positions at Fiserv and are most recently focused in this area on embedded finance. Maybe you could help us to understand a little bit about, why the urgency and the excitement around that particular topic right now.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. Great to be here. The role that I've taken up recently around embedded finance reflects the changes that we're seeing all around us in banking and payments. And it also reflects kind of the evolution of Fiserv. Post the merger with First Data, we are much more a commerce company today. And with digitization of everything happening all around us, I think Fiserv is one of the few companies in the world that has assets that can help kind of lead the way with regards to embedded finance. We live in a world today where everything is digital. The next generation is much more digitally native in their experiences and what their expectations are than previous generations. I think folks recognize the lines are blurring between shopping and banking. And those are the areas that we have a lot of capability in. So the role that I've taken on as the head of embedded finance is to take capabilities that sit in verticals of Fiserv, whether it's banking, merchant, or our issuer team, and kind of string them together horizontally so we can engage with customers the way they want to be engaged and help our clients expand their TAMs to deliver services and experiences their customers expect. So it's a great opportunity for the company, but it is very much reflecting what we're seeing in the world around us, given the pace of change around banking and payments.
It's been really interesting for me. Obviously, as you know, Finxact became a Fiserv company a little over a year ago. And so that's allowed for me to have a bit of time to observe that. And what I've been really impressed by is just the way that the Fiserv has such a differentiated group of businesses that are thriving independently. However, as you mentioned a few of them, issuance, merchant, payments, core for institutions large and small. So while they are thriving independently, there's a lot of synergy across them. And that synergy, ultimately, and it sounds like you're looking at ways to make that happen, but redounds to the benefit of our clients. And it can confer, competitive advantage, not just for Fiserv, but for them too.
Yeah, look, I think Fiserv historically, definitely in the US, but also from a global footprint perspective, has been a leader in core banking services. In the US, we've got 35% market share of core banking. We are a leader on the merchant acquiring side, as well as the issuer processing side of things, right? Those are all ingredients that are needed to facilitate commerce in any part of the world. So when we looked at Finxact, and I was part of the team that was brought in to take a look underneath the hood when we acquired Finxact more than a year ago. And one of the primary things that I liked about it from the get-go was the pliability of the data model and how we could position Finxact as a Gen 3 core, which again is kind of our primary go-to-market, but also how we could leverage the Finxact ledger to facilitate commerce from entities that never did financial services before. So whether you look at the grocery industry, whether you look at the auto industry, whether you look at niche vertical software companies that exist around the world today that are servicing different types of tailored, financial service offerings. When you look at all of those areas, Finxact really can help accelerate the capabilities and the experiences they provide to their last mile customer, not just the merchant that they serve or the small business that they serve, but the small business customers as well. So you're right, Chris. I think historically, we've been a company where we focused on very verticalized capabilities that we would bring solutions into banking, into merchant, into issuer. Now, again, as we talked at the top, we're seeing this kind of convergence happening in the marketplace where everybody wants to embed financial services. We've seen the rise of new low value money movement networks like FedNow, like what Zelle is doing. We're going to see that on the high value side as well. Real-time payments is upending commercials as well as use cases around money movement. All of these things are happening at the same time. And I think we're very privileged to have an asset like Finxact that can help us kind of extend those capabilities that we've traditionally had within the company into these new markets.
Yeah, that has been really exciting for me as well. As you said, you were part of that team doing the discovery. And there, it was the case for Finxact prior to becoming a part of Fiserv that we were doing one thing really, really well. And that was the essential position keeping function for all of, whether the positions are deposits, loans, whatever, and the transaction processing engine for the movement of all of those positions. But we didn't set out to build the rest of the banking ecosystem. And that was very intentional. And that had some implications for us. And one of them was that, very large financial institutions who had the wherewithal and perhaps the preference to design their own ecosystem and have that look the way they want it. And they wanted a next-gen platform with highly available modern APIs to do it. So we were getting some traction there. We really wanted to get into the community institution market too, but we very quickly learned that you're not going to get to do that unless you're bringing more of a full stack.
Right.
So it was super exciting for us just in half a dozen different directions to become, a part of Fiserv because like you're talking about, like all of those assets, we're now connecting the dots. We're able to address those additional markets. So that's really exciting. And then embedded finance, that's one that's just exploding. You've had a little over a year to observe it. What have you been most excited about? Watching the technologies, the teams working together. What's been your takeaway thus far?
Look, I've been doing banking and payments in the US and globally for over 2 decades now, Chris. And I've been very privileged and lucky to have worked with lots of great teams in my career on a lot of different types of payment and banking innovations. One of the things that struck me in terms of what's happening now versus, what I've experienced previously is that a couple of things are converging at the same time. Historically, there's been lots of great opportunities to move the needle in terms of payment or banking innovation, but then the market's not ready for that innovation, right? The innovation is probably 1 or 2 steps ahead of where the market is, or the regulatory environment is creating some type of bottleneck for that innovation to truly take hold. And again, for me, what is really exciting is the fact that we've got a fantastic platform like Finxact at the right time in a market where banking, payments, vertical software is converging. We've got a customer segment, whether it's commercial or retail, of their everyday money movement needs. And it's all coming together at the same time. And we've got a regulatory environment, at least in the US, that has recognized what plumbing upgrades they need to do from a FedNow perspective to build in rails that can facilitate the last mile movement of all of these transactions as well. So I just think over the next, 6, 12, 18 months, what you're going to see from and hear from Fiserv are going to be all of these areas where we're expanding and enabling commerce and upgrading those experiences in a way that people have just been waiting for, right? And I think we're just right place, right time with the right solution set, honestly.
Your comments about the convergence of real-time payments and real-time platforms like Finxact, I think where everybody's starting to see that those two need to move together. On the subject of what you often hear the term banking as a service, embedded finance, sometimes, implying slightly different things. But I think perhaps what a lot of these opportunities have in common, it may be a broad spectrum of opportunities, but, in most cases, I think you're talking about rendering banking products, financial services in circumstances or in channels that may not be your typical sort of consumer bank channel or interaction. And you're seeing now a number of the enterprise brands, the corporate brands, recognizing that, hey, I'm in a really good position to do this. I have customers, I have, their loyalty, their affinity, their spend, but maybe I could have a deeper relationship with that customer. How can a company like Fiserv help me with that? We've seen a couple of the really big examples. I guess Apple is certainly one.
Right.
I'm sure there are others, but what makes an enterprise brand like that a good candidate for embedded finance, for extending financial services through their customer experience channels?
Yeah, no, Chris, and I think you did a great job of answering some of that yourself and just kind of highlighting why embedded finance is gaining momentum in the marketplace, right? But when you look at brands, they're trying to balance a couple of different things, right? One is internally operational expense. Brands now, with customers having so many choices of what payment modality they can use at the point of sale or at checkout, brands have different levels of expenses that they need to manage to accept all of those different payment modalities. So if brands can influence customers to use a certain payment modality, either in store or online, that is not only provides a great experience, but decreases cost on their end, while also enabling them to learn more about their loyal customers, they're going to go for that. And I think with what embedded finance has taught them is there is now options to do that, right? They can do that without holding a charter. They can do that without having money transmitter licenses. They need to have the right partnerships and the right service capabilities, and they can extend their engagement with whether it's a commercial customer or a retail customer through those partnerships. I think on the customer side, where we're seeing kind of this growth in acceptance of leveraging financial services from non-financial institutions is again, a hallmark of the change in psyche from one generation to another. But it's also the fact that I think a lot of the digitization that's happened in the marketplace has left customers feeling kind of left on an island, so to speak, because you've got money in your Starbucks account, you've got money in your mobile or Exxon wallet, you've got money maybe tied up in a private label credit card with one of the retailers that you work with. Verizon and AT&T just recently asked you like, hey, rather than put a credit card on file, can you put your bank account on file and we'll give you a discount in terms of auto pay. So I think there's lots of these options, and what it's doing is splitting the wallet of that customer more and more discreetly. So the brands have also recognized that, hey, one way to help that customer is to provide them capabilities that aggregate those areas of value and give them higher levels of purchasing power. We're in an economy today, Chris, where interest rates are, I think most would argue are in a normal level, right? Prior to the pandemic or prior to the financial crisis, we're now in a 3 to 5% range on interest rates. Inflation is probably a lot higher than what most people have experienced over the last decade. So I think we're in this arena now where brands and different types of commercial entities are looking to help customers increase their purchasing power and being able to provide financial services, whether it starts with, Chris, buy now, pay later, right? Where you could help a customer buy something today and pay it off over time. Now we're going beyond that and saying, hey, you've got different islands of value. You've got value in loyalty points. You've got value in all of these disparate wallets. Let me help you aggregate that so you can purchase what you need to do at the point of sale. And I think that is kind of the holy grail for a lot of these large brands is, one, learn more about the customer. Two, make it easier for them to pay with their preferred payment modality without it costing a lot for their brand to process that payment. And lastly, how do I increase the purchasing power of that customer to help me increase conversions or basket size at the point of sale, whether that's a physical location or a checkout? Does that help?
It helps a lot. It makes me think of the effort that's going on right now at Fiserv, and there are a lot of people working on it. When we talked at the top of our conversation about the different business units of Fiserv, that, from a certain viewpoint may look like they are serving a discrete purpose, sort of thriving independently, as I said, but there's connective tissue there.
Yep.
And you guys are working on that connective tissue as a microservices platform, essentially. So whether you're talking, I don't know, Clover, Carrot, the many assets that Fiserv has, can you explain that strategy a little bit?
Yeah, look, I think as the ecosystem grows of people that want to offer financial services, Chris, beyond traditional financial institutions, we have to appreciate that those players don't have the maturity that financial institutions do in banking and payments, right? So we've almost got to kind of help them kind of crawl, walk, run through this process and get up to speed in terms of kind of what are the services that they need? How do those services integrate best into their user experience? How do they manage all of the regulatory and compliance needs that go along with offering these types of services? How do they manage that sponsor bank relationship that's driving a lot of those capabilities or enabling those capabilities for them? And we've spent a lot of time building out what you talked at the top of the hour, which was, Developer Studio, our microservices layer. And what that basically is the ability for folks to come in, take a look at all of the different types of assets that Fiserv has. We've spent a lot of time and effort to expose the services of those assets through this Developer Studio platform that allows these actually banks as well as non-banks to come in and kind of pick and choose which type of services they want to enable in their user experience, whether it's a banking service where they want to have a savings account associated with a debit card, whether it's a secured credit type of service because they want to go after folks that may not have the ability to have an unsecured credit card, or whether it's to issue an unsecured credit card or any type of loan that is needed to help them, take care of that conversion we talked about earlier. So the net of it all is we're spending a lot of time across the company taking a look at all of the different assets and capabilities that we have, enabling them to be engaged through a single front door, which is this microservices layer that then allows folks to embed those services and create the experiences that they want.
Very cool. If you don't mind, maybe for just a minute, we duck out of the world of embedded finance, and I'd just like to get your opinion on another of the segments that is obviously strategically important to Finxact and Fiserv, but just the incumbent institutions. And maybe this has been a long time building, but it is certainly the case that these next-gen platforms, and there are just a handful of us, they have the full attention of the U.S. incumbent banks and credit unions. So from your opinion, why?
Yeah, look, I think, again, it harkens back to what we talked about. I think everybody is seeing the world converging, and everybody is recognizing that the customers they serve want to be engaged more digitally than they ever had before. And financial institutions are among those that are being impacted by the change that's happening around them. And I think financial institutions recognize that they've got to change a couple of things, right? One is at the heart of their technology stack. They've got to modernize their technology stack to keep up with some of the competitors that are non-FIs that are offering these types of services. But two, I think financial institutions are also recognizing they need to couple the modernization of their back end with the modernization of their business model as well. For as far as I can remember, banks made money by taking in deposits and lending those deposits out at a higher rate. Today, that model is changing, right? Interest rates are going up. I think banks are struggling to bring in deposits into their balance sheet. Banks are struggling to figure out without those deposits how they could keep their lending mechanism continuing to grow. and then earning that net interest margin. So a lot of these institutions are saying, look, I've got to change both things. I've got to change my business model because I really need to look at commerce differently because it's happening differently in the marketplace. And to do that, I need to have my underlying tech modernized so I can keep up with these changes and be more nimble from a speed to market perspective. I would say that's true for community banks, regional banks, and obviously, the top national banks in the country.
Across the board.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And certainly beyond the US. You mentioned it a moment ago, and I wanted to maybe devote the last bit of our time to the Developer Studio. This is a very important effort that Fiserv has undertaken. Maybe just once again, briefly, what is it? And then I know that one of the motivations had a lot to do with self-service. Fiserv understanding that not just for Fiserv, for the many clients, prospects, fintechs, those who just wanted to have a little bit of a, maybe not a relationship quite yet, but just start to understand what are some of these assets and be able to interact with them. So what does that look like today? Where is it going?
No, it's a great question, Chris. I think at the heart of the rationale around Developer Studio is what you hit upon, and the fact that with the growth in the ecosystem and the democratization of financial services, more and more people are curious about what they can do by embedding these capabilities in their native experiences. And, historically, Fiserv served some very traditional segments, right? And we set up our delivery mechanism, we set up our intake mechanism to work in those segments in certain prescribed time horizons, right? To help them kind of either modernize their tech, sell them new solutions. As we now start getting more and more people engaging in financial services, we recognized that delivery channel was going to get overburdened very quickly. And we felt the best way to do this is take advantage of the services we already have in-house and make them easily available to the larger audience. And over the last, I would say, 6 to 12 months, the team has worked very diligently to now put on Developer Studio assets like our Premier Core, our Signature Core, and now Finxact, where anybody can come in and get access to and access instances of these cores for free, so they can now kind of play around and build their POC or build their MVP off of those sandboxes that are available. And they also now have the ability, post that experience, to basically purchase their own instance of that core so they can continue to build out that capability for their customers or for financial institutions that are looking to better appreciate the software that they have. I think historically, what we have gotten feedback, Chris, over the years is that while we have some great assets and capabilities, our ability to serve our customers in a very kind of nimble and quick way was always inhibited by a lot of bureaucracy between their interest in engaging with us and their actual ability to then connect to the underlying platform. With Developer Studio, our goal is to kind of eradicate that bureaucracy and allow them quicker access to those underlying assets. Premier is the most popular core in the country. Over 800, 900 banks use Premier today, from the largest banks in the country to the smallest community banks in the country. Signature has been a great asset for Fiserv for decades, and it's used by some of the most well-known financial institutions in the country. Finxact has really kind of led the charge, because when you bring in an asset like Finxact into kind of your ecosystem as Fiserv, we've learned a lot from the Finxact team. We've learned about the importance of meeting the client, where they need to be met. We recognize the need for speed in everything that we do from a banking and payments perspective. So Developer Studio, in a lot of cases, was designed with Finxact in mind. And it's a great example of how the Finxact acquisition has helped us lift all boats in terms of, providing similar types of experiences for the other tech that we have. So it's almost like to like for what Finxact can do. Does that make sense?
It sure does. And I know that there are a lot of people that are really happy about that development at Fiserv. Tell me a little bit, like, what does progression, look like
Sure.
inside of the studio? So maybe I'm a developer and I don't want a phone call. I just want to get an instance of Finxact, start to test some ideas that I have and be left alone for a little while. But, eventually, how do I progress in there?
Sure. I think it's it's a couple of steps. You go to Fiserv.com, you click on the developer button on the top of the screen, you fill out some information, you register, and then you get some private keys that allow you access to the solution that you've selected off of Developer Studio. We've talked to fintechs, and they've shared with us that they've been able to get access to the keys to Premier or some of the other assets that we have on there in minutes. And they're within, an hour or two, their developers are working on building prototypes off of those sandbox instances that they have access to. And the greatest compliment that we got recently was that one of the fintechs that took advantage of this, kind of happy path through Developer Studio to access Premier was able to build a working prototype that they went to a financial institution and demoed in front of them and were able to win the contract, right? So gone are the days of Figma presentations and slideware. When you can actually build a working prototype off of a Finxact instance, take it into a financial institution that's running Finxact or looking to acquire that similar type of service and be able to demo it and show water running through the pipes, I think is very moving for that audience, right? It really lends a lot of credibility to that solution and service itself.
And the way you describe that, it really seems like the studio is facilitating sort of connections between the fintechs, the financial institutions. Is that a part of that as well? And
yeah, no, that's a great question, Chris, and your intuition is spot on. I think as we kind of build out these foundational capabilities to make it easier for all parties in the ecosystem to engage with our assets, then the next obvious thing for us was to kind of let's introduce them to the other side, right? Almost kind of a matchmaking environment. And we're working on something called Fintech Exchange. We shared a little bit about this capability at Fiserv Forum recently in Las Vegas at our customer event. And basically, it's the ability to help financial institutions partner with the right fintechs and vice versa. One of the questions that I get almost all the time when I talk to financial institutions is, Sunil, I've got these problems, right? These are my challenges. How can you help me, connect to the right folks on the other side that can help me take care of this experience? And it's usually a service or a product that Fiserv doesn't offer. So we're more than happy to play that matchmaking role. But after a certain while, it's hard to scale that from a one-to-one conversation. So having that to be enabled electronically through the Developer Studio and through what we're calling Fintech Exchange, I think is going to be welcomed by a lot of parties. I know the fintechs that are engaged with us today are very excited about it. I know the financial institutions I've talked to are very excited about being able to decrease the amount of discovery they need to do to engage with the right partner to solve the problem that they have.
The Developer Studio and the efforts you're putting behind that are answering the question, but do you continue to see an acceleration in the partnerships between fintechs and financial institutions going forward?
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, as the ecosystem grows, embedded finance seems to be the maturation of an industry that started with neobanks, fintechs, banking as a service, and now into this kind of arena of embedded finance where there's really solid commercial underpinnings to kind of growing that trend. So I feel like a lot of the participants that are going to start doing these types of embedded finance or embedding financial service capabilities, I think they're always going to need a financial institution behind them, right? And the fact that we're the number one core banking provider in the country and have access to thousands of financial institutions, again, gives us the ability to help those institutions connect the dots better and increase, hopefully deposits for the bank as well as fee revenue for the bank by extending their charter through these different avenues and channels that we have.
Hey, Sunil, I really appreciate your time. It's great chatting with you, and I can assure you that our listeners and our viewers appreciate it because you have a very valuable perspective from where you sit. And so thank you for doing it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's been great being here.